Hello and welcome to the Voice Extra podcast. Today I'm here with student, musician, and voice contributor
Emma Beatrice.
How are you doing today, Emma?
I'm okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this.
Yeah, so what are we talking about, Emma?
We're talking about the situation with the arts at the moment, the government funding that's been put forward in kind of the nick of time, actually. And yeah, we're talking about that today.
Yeah. Emma, would you like to introduce the situation in the arts kind of leading up to this package for anyone who might not know?
Yeah, so the situation with the arts, obviously we're currently in the midst of a global pandemic, and that hasn't been great for venues and places like theatres during the lockdown, as people just haven't been going to shows. They haven't been able to put on any shows. Basically, they've suffered a lot of cuts and losses within the sector. So that's art, music, theatre, etc. And some quite dramatic redundancies have been made throughout institutions that you might have never thought could have suffered so badly from events. Like on Thursday, the National Theatre confirmed that without more financial aid, there would be redundancies because it had lost more than 75% of its income as a result of the impact of COVID. And the cuts could amount to 30% of the staff being made redundant, which is just absolutely devastating. And it's something that is kind of unprecedented along with the rest of the situation at the moment with COVID, but it's kind of heartbreaking, actually.
So that's very doom and gloom.
Yeah, but there is a package.
there is
the government
a
has
package of sorts.
Yeah.
So even also across even outside of just theatre, there was a report saying that up to 400,000 jobs could be lost, according to the Creative Industries Federation. So yeah, lots of potential job losses. So there was then a package offered by the government, pretty late in the game, if I'm frank, that was a 1.15 billion pound support pot for cultural organisations in the UK, delivered through grants and loans. So 270 million of this would be loans, 880 million of this would be grants. 100 million will be ring fenced for heritage trust type institutions. 120 million would also be ring fenced for construction on infrastructure that was interrupted by the pandemic. And there was also an extra 188 million for devolved powers. So that's 33 million for Northern Ireland, 97 million for Scotland, 59 million for Wales, added to funding they already had, which admittedly wasn't much. So these decisions will be made by Arts Council England, Historic England, the various arts and culture institutions in the UK. And this is kind of designed to tide them over. You can read the full article on this on The Voice, and I will link it in the comments. Yes? Yeah.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting about the government's package, and what a lot of people were talking about online within the arts sector, is how long it actually took to materialise or even really be talked about. It emerged and it was announced in early July, which compared to other European countries was rather late, and in some cases for smaller theatres and institutions, too late, in a way that they can never fully recover from what they've been through.
Yeah. And obviously it's a difficult situation, even if the government was doing their best and whatever, it's a difficult situation, and it's unlikely that every institution would have survived. But the degree to which this package was released, I think the 5th of July was when it was announced.
Yeah, the 5th of July. Yeah.
And even then, that obviously hasn't come into effect yet, at least as of the time of recording. So these institutions would have had to have survived months without any real level of funding, except for basically the generosity of people. So you've seen there's been lots of you've probably seen, if you're listening to this, lots of GoFundMe's or other of that kind of thing, of people trying to donate money to like make these arts institutions survive because of, especially in the UK, because of how much they were kind of left out to dry for months, which isn't great, I would say.
Yeah, in a way, they didn't take a preventative approach. In a way, they're just healing the places that have survived.
Yeah, it's kind of like a plaster over a massive wound.
Massive wound. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
And there's definitely also questions over whether it will actually help. Because if we look at the amount of funding, it's 1.15 billion compared to France's 7 billion and Germany's 43.6 billion. So obviously the countries have different sizes, etc., etc., but that's still very stark in terms of the difference in funding.
Absolutely. And also the fact that this funding was supplied a lot earlier in the game. Well, not in the game, in in the lockdown. It showed that they had an insight into how quickly the arts and culture sector would need the money. I think our government potentially didn't act quickly enough. But I don't know. I think the money definitely is very, very welcome. But it's questionable whether it is actually, although it sounds like a lot of money, £1.5 billion to a lot of people sounds enormous. Actually, the UK creative industries are facing a £74 billion drop in income after lockdown is lifted,
Yeah.
which is just after, 4 months of not being able to put on any shows or gain any income.
And
So although it
yeah,
does seem generous, it's not. It's like a drop in the ocean, really.
I think part of the thing we have to consider as well is UK arts institutions are, especially outside of the West End, but in general, to be honest, are not particularly well funded to begin with. It's not
Mm.
like they're like flush with money and the government's like, oh, we only need to give them a little bit. Like they were running on like just about making enough money to survive before the pandemic, and that's even without taking like Brexit into account, which we'll come to later. But they were already struggling, and the fact that, and so a relatively small funding, given that it's going to everything in arts and culture, and also which is a massive industry, and that also part of its loans. Like when you put that all together, that's not as much as it seems, as I'm all
Yeah,
saying.
it's huge, and I think that in a way, what people always tell each other when it comes to sort of budgeting and stuff, and it also applies to companies to a certain extent, is save a penny for a rainy day. And often companies and theatres didn't have that penny to save for a rainy day. The rainy day was COVID-19, and it wasn't just one rainy day, it was 4 months of rainy days. And the
Yeah.
rainy day in this situation is just not having any customers or clients or audience
Hmm.
members, etc. And that's going to have a massive impact on the entire art scene within the UK.
And I think one of the big questions around this package is like, will it actually be distributed in a way that's useful or that is actually maintains the arts? Because there is like the problem of what could essentially happen, like in like a worst or more cynical situation, is that this money basically props up the West End and like a few other London like music theatre, gallery, etc. type things, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's very little money given for off West End theatres, venues outside of London, venues outside of the South and the Southeast. They've said that it will be used to support local institutions, but they haven't been very specific. The government, sorry, Oliver Dowden and the government haven't been particularly specific about how they will ensure that it doesn't essentially get swallowed up by London, which is a
Yeah,
general issue with arts funding even before a whole pandemic.
definitely. I think Oliver Dowden is very focused. He released in his statement, he said that one of his main goals, or their main goals, the government's main goals is to preserve the crown jewel venues in the UK, like the Royal Albert Hall and National Galleries, which, whilst also helping local institutions across the UK, They've also left it to Art Council England, Historic England, National Lottery Heritage Fund, and British Film Institute to distribute and award money to different places. What I think may end up happening is just lots of funding application wars from companies all around the UK, and smaller companies just won't have access to that fund. So although on the surface it seems like a lifeline, actually when the big venues get their teeth into the money, not much will be left after they've finished with it.
Yeah, and then the problem then becomes if we look at exactly who and where the big venues are. The big venues are predominantly in the West End. They are predominantly middle and upper class. They even off West End things don't have many disabled performers, but like these big West Endy places have next to no disabled performers, etc., etc. Like the list goes on. What is a big potential here is that essentially the funding goes to like the safer performances and the safer spaces that are these crown jewels, which are these really exclusive institutions, and it essentially means that working class people, etc., are just shut out of arts at least for the next like 5, 10, however long years, which would be
Yeah,
a
I think
waste.
totally. And in a way, before COVID even happened, what the kind of plans that were being put in place for the future when it came to institutions was to try and make it more accessible for all people. And with this likely allocation of funding to places where it is basically full of middle and upper class white people, that is not meeting any of those targets. And I hate calling them targets because actually it's kind of essential, and that makes it sound very businesslike. But from their point of view, that's how they may see it. Ultimately, everyone should have access to the arts, and this may make it even less accessible than it was before.
Yeah, exactly. I think we should move to the next kind of important question here. Something I've kind of like noticed in with the arts thing is that there weren't that many people who were like outside who didn't work in the arts sector or weren't like critics or whatever who were particularly incensed about the arts like not being particularly well funded. And
Mm,
I think something we have to do, and like as the arts industry in general needs to do, is make a better case to people as opposed to the government for why its continued existence should happen. Because I think most people, like through no fault of their own, do not understand how much arts and culture is A, reliant on government funding, and B, how much it's in all of their lives. And
yeah.
I guess you got to say like, why is it important that the arts stay alive? Why? Because we need to say it as opposed to kind of just like implying that it should just be there for its own sake.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that potentially why some people might think that arts and culture is something that isn't maybe as important as other areas is because the government doesn't prioritize it really recently. And if somebody is reading most tabloid newspapers in the UK, that's the vibe that they're going to get. And maybe they might form their own opinions, or there might be a kind of a feeling that the arts, you hear the words arts and culture and think that's not really me. I'm working class. I work in a supermarket. I go to the cinema sometimes, but arts and culture sounds like something that people who are sort of in the upper classes might participate in, but actually why should I fund that, or why should I be interested in that? And actually it's a lot bigger than a lot of people think. It's not kind of your classic exclusive art gallery or kind of quirky theatre event. It's all sorts of things, from comedy to people who compose music for TV shows and adverts, and just things that people interact with on their day in their day-to-day lives. And they'll only really know that they needed it when they miss it if it goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that is a massive thing to consider, and I think that needs to be addressed with schemes to try and break down that barrier between people that go to sort of middle class performances and people that don't, whether that be subsidizing tickets to events and that kind of thing when events become available again to people following lockdown. In terms of why the art's important to save, well, obviously it's very easy for people that are in the arts sector to say, yeah, please save us. Of course, that we do want to be saved, truly. But I think it's essential, not only from our point of view, but I think obviously many people have found lockdown incredibly stressful. And a lot of people haven't had the middle class problem of just occupying the time, picking up new skills, learning guitar, or being bored. It's not been a viable option for many people if they're in essential but low paid jobs. And actually, a lot of people have been working more than they ever have in their entire lives because of 0-hour contracts and employers saying, well, you're a cleaner and this place needs to be clean 24/7. So I'm upping your hours and now you have no free time. And then that mixed in with the stress of financial stresses, lack of social contact, bereavement, being severely ill with COVID-19, money problems in general in the family, domestic abuse, childcare stress, being away from elderly dependents. It's going to lead to more and more people not feeling great, potentially developing mental health problems. And the country will emerge from this crisis feeling like emotionally and mentally drained. And in a way, the arts and culture sector has the potential to provide relief and entertainment to a nation that needs fun and laughter and music. And they will need it after this. It will be essential for people to recover mentally and emotionally, I feel.
Yeah. I think, like, I'm going to use my immediate frame of reference, which is theatre, which is that there's at least in terms of theatre, and I think in terms of other arts as well, there is kind of a difference between the British attitude to theatre and arts and let's say the German attitude.
Yeah.
Because I think, broadly speaking, now obviously I don't know the specifics, I'm making generalizations, but in Germany and in other continental European nations, at least some of them, arts are seen as more like an integral part of the nation. Like, it's seen as something which is important and projects and actually connects to people, at least on some level. Whereas in the UK, it's more like, and to be frank, it is the fault of a lot of artists/arts institutions. It projects the image of, oh, we're something separate. We're just like this cool thing which is just like on our own, and we're just like in this ivory tower. We're not integrated with people in a meaningful way. And I think part of that is which is part of why the government can get away with underfunding arts, is because people are like, oh, that's, as you were saying, people are like, that's got nothing to do with me. It's arts and culture. But it's more of a thing of, oh no, we actually need to make the connection so that people, when the government, or when whichever government goes, oh, we're not going to give funding, people are like, actually, no, I appreciate this because it's done X, Y, Z in my community. And I think that's really important to do, even from a cynical, oh, the arts needs to survive perspective.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a different culture within this country towards arts or a different approach or attitude.
Yeah.
It's so different, and I think it's really important for the arts to be accessible. And although, not to sound cynical, but it may be very cushy for middle class people to enjoy the exclusivity of the arts. Actually, when it comes down to it, the arts can't survive without more people being interested in it, because more people need to say, we actually need to save this. And those people that feel like they are in this exclusive club, in a way, we need to get rid of that attitude completely, because many of those people consider themselves very liberal as well. And it's like, if you're
Yeah.
so liberal, you really need to change your attitudes towards letting other people into this club. Spoiler, it's not a club, and it shouldn't be, and it never should have been. And I think it has just become this way over time to a certain extent within certain circles and certain spaces within the arts. And we've just really need to break it down. And there needs to be certain schemes run with people within the arts that know how it works, not external people that did a degree in law and then think that they can deal with it, to try and break down these barriers, because we need to take action.
Yeah.
We need to take action rather than just putting, what seems like a large amount of money towards something that we know nothing about, and then not actually taking responsibility to allocate it fairly.
Yeah. Or how I see it anyway, you can disagree with this. There are basically two routes in which we can go. We can either say, we're going to try and bring, which applies to broader society. We can say, oh, we're going to try and bring back what was there before and do it to the best of our ability, or etc. Or we can go, okay, we're actually going to restructure to do something better. Because particularly theatre, I think live arts in general were not exactly the healthiest in the healthiest of places even before a pandemic came.
Yeah.
But so things like need to change, and I think for me personally, one of the things that needs to change is how much we focus on maintaining these these quote unquote crown jewel institutions, whilst we let more local and communal stuff just die. Like, it's all good having your Royal Albert Halls and your National Theatres and your Almeida Theatres or whatever, but if there's nothing local and there's nothing connecting to people, what is the point?
Yeah.
Is my thing. I don't know if there's anything else you think should be
Yeah.
involved in sort
I
of
mean,
shake
I
up.
mean, also, I mean, everything has to start somewhere, and at some point, hard to believe it, sort of those crown jewels may have been quite small themselves, and if nothing had been in place at that time for them to keep on going, they would have just disappeared. So I'm not saying that everything will become as big or become be elevated to the status of being seen as a national crown jewel, but actually massive things can come from small institutions. If you think about, take the show that has been critically acclaimed, Fleabag by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, that started as a 10-minute comedy sketch, I think, in the Fringe, and then that grew to a full-blown hour-long comedy show, and then became a BBC series. And it had to start somewhere. If we cut out all the smaller institutions, we won't get any creative growth within this country.
And even the small institutions should also just be allowed to exist for their own sake.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. It's not just for the bigger
yeah,
purpose.
it's not like we're keeping all these small ones because maybe one of them will produce a Phoebe Waller-Bridge or produce a
Yeah,
Michaela
that's true.
Cole,
Yeah,
produce or
absolutely.
whatever. Like, I think there is a value in having it there just for its own sake, because it's important to communities and to, as you were saying, to do with stuff with mental health. I think this links into something that's been happening recently, is that which is this hashtag pull up or shut up campaign. So this is
Yeah.
basically a campaign which is telling theaters. I think it's theater focused, but also it's kind of a broader thing, which is like, instead of telling us about how much you care about diversity and how much you allegedly say Black Lives Matter or whatever, show us your actual statistics, show us who you're commissioning, show us who you're hiring, show us who's on your board. And I think that's important, because essentially, if your board is entirely like white middle class people, the only people who are going to come to your theatre, who are going to come to your venue, your musical venue, are going to come to your gallery, are essentially going to be white middle class people, because you're essentially making art which appeals to them. Because as much as you may try and be like thinking about other perspectives or whatever, if they're not in the room, they're not in the room. Right? There's only a
Yeah,
certain amount
exactly.
you can ventriloquize yourself into a working class person or into a black person, into whatever. Like, you have to have those people in the room to, because that's how you get theaters consistently filled, and that's how you get people actually caring about galleries or about music. You actually involve them as opposed to just being like, oh, here are these like 10 venues in London. Come on down, guys. You're going to feel incredibly out of place. But hey, it's fine. And also, it's just the thing of like, we would rather keep this like decrepit old building going than actually fund anything new. Like, that's
Yeah,
kind of the
exactly.
attitude in a lot of spaces. And
Yeah.
I know you do a lot of music stuff. You might be able to speak to that area more than me. But yeah, I don't know. It just seems like things need to change.
Yeah, exactly. I think in all areas of life, people have been talking about following lockdown, the new normal, and what's going to be not what's going to be what's going to happen. And a lot of people have been saying, "Will it go back to how it was?" And in many ways, I really hope it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
because lockdown has been a time for people that have been privileged enough not to work horrendously long shifts, myself included, having lots of time to think about things and evaluate the system and how it works. And it really shouldn't go back to how it was before, because it was kind of working, but for only certain people. And as you say, if they're not in the room, you can't kind of imagine what they might say. You might as well employ them. It's a lot easier rather than playing lots of guessing games.
Yeah.
Um, and also, yeah, I think for too long, the institutions like theatres have been run by white middle class people, and for anyone else, it's just been a kind of, well, it may be a different experience for you, but that's just how it is. We're not going to change it. It suits
Mm-hmm.
us, so actually, everyone can just deal with it. But unfortunately, that's just, it's not sustainable in the long run. It's not, because fortunately, as people become gradually more equal,
Yeah.
um, we hopefully will see more people being represented within different places and on different boards. And we need that to happen in the end, in order for theatres to be appropriate for all people and actually connect with everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like, you're not going to do that by bringing the same, like, five knighted British actors to do Shakespeare. Like, no
Yeah, I
one, you're
know.
not bringing new people in by doing that. Like, as much as Ian McKellen, bless his heart, he seems like the most lovely human being, but oh my gosh, he is always doing a Shakespeare at a prestigious theatre, and it's like, the amount of money that must cost. Imagine if that went to literally anything else. And you know what I mean, right? Because it's like, if it's Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, Benedict Cumberbatch, Dame Judi Dench, uh, who else? Rafe
Andrew Scott.
Fiennes, Andrew Scott. Like, there's a cadre of about 10, maybe up to 10 of these, like, respected British actors who are all, or predominantly, oh, I say British, but these respected actors from this region who are all like predominantly all middle class and white, whatever, who we're going to bring in to do Shakespeare, the same Shakespeare every time. I guarantee at least one of them, if not a few, are doing a Shakespeare show at any one time. Like Ian McKellen's working on his new one now. And it's like, we've got to do better. We just
Mm,
have to. Otherwise, even if miraculously the arts recovers from COVID-19 and Brexit and isn't terrible, things will eventually crash. It's like you're slowing an inevitable fall, but
yeah.
something needs to change. And part of the problem is that as much as like my instinct almost is to be like, yeah, just let it burn and then we can rebuild it. The thing is, the people who like suffer are always the like least people with the least funds and the least means, and like particularly in theatre, where there are so many people, and not even just theatre, sorry, particularly in the arts. How many people in the arts are freelancers? Like, how many
Most
people?
people will have a freelance
Yeah,
element to their job.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, no one in the arts just has one job. Like, except if you're like a
Portfolio careers
director
are
or
rife. Yeah,
yeah. So
absolutely.
it's like we can't just continue as it is, but it also can't just all crash, because that just means that we end up with the same problems of, oh, only the rich can actually afford to access arts. So it's basically very complicated, but people need to actually like try, because there are people doing it, like this company called like the Upsetters, and there's a few others
Hmm.
like Scott and Friends and stuff, which like actually are doing stuff to they sort of like Beatbox Academy, I think they're called, another one, are doing stuff to actually do things different and to actually restructure stuff. But so many people are just so unwilling to change and just sit there like, oh, we just kind of want it back how it was. And it's like, no, it needs to be different. It needs to change. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also in a way it if you're picking, for example, as you were talking about for like the Royal Shakespeare Company or Shakespeare shows from a pool of, I don't know, 10 to 20 people, it's easy. That's an easy way to get a big name in, and it feels very comfortable if you're organising it all, and you probably know them quite well because you've worked with them before. So it's all very comfortable. The audience is very comfortable because they recognise them, and the audience probably go quite regularly, probably white middle class people, and they need to feel uncomfortable. They need to feel uncomfortable because this level of comfort is just never going to change things to how they kind of have to be in the end, because we need to pick from a wider pool of people and allow new actors of any age, race, gender, sexuality to come through into the industry. Um, and people will adjust to it. I think people think that it would be too drastic and that they want to see Benedict Cumberbatch and all that jam. I mean, same, but but at the same time, you know, change isn't always bad. It's not always bad, and it needs to happen, and it will be much more sustainable in the long run and make the arts much more accessible for all people.
Yeah. I
Definitely.
think that will do us for today.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, you have all enjoyed this discussion. And if you've got anything to contribute, anything you'd want to discuss with us about, where would they find you, Emma?
They'd find me on Twitter at Emma Beatrice 11. Yep. So Emma is with a capital and Beatrice also with a capital and 11.
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. So you can find this podcast at VoiceMag UK on Instagram and Twitter. You can find the Voice Extra page where contributors talk about like what we're doing in our lives, what we've been watching or whatever, at voice.extra on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to voicemag.uk to see all the articles, to see this article, whatever. Also go listen to the Voice Mag podcast, which is like more interviews with artists and people like that. And please could you rate, review, all that jazz. It helps us a ton and we will be forever in your debt. So thank you so much. Thank you for being with me, Emma, today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for letting us use Shaving Mirror. You can find his stuff on incompetech.com.